Okay. Sit back and relax. Put your feet up and enjoy the ride. So, hello everyone once again, and welcome to another masterclass. As you probably know, I'm Maria, a business English educator specializing in intermediate levels and above. Today, I'll walk you through 30 power phrases you need to know if you attend meetings. And these phrases will help you navigate your meetings, especially if you work with native speakers. But they will also help you sound more natural, more professional, and effective. So feel free to jot down any questions you might have or take notes. But if I add anything else, well, I mean, I've already added something into the chat, didn't I? So I'll send that to you alongside the video and also maybe something else. Yeah. So we'll be dealing with your questions if you have any at the end. So we'll have 10 minutes-ish to discuss the questions and your key takeaways. So stay with me until the end if you can. I've been planning to speak for about 40 minutes-ish. So we'll see how that pans out. So cheers to that. I'll need to hydrate myself, and you can also sip whatever you're sipping. So before we get down to it, I want to debunk this kind of a misconception that business English is always formal. That might have been like that that might have been true in the past, but it's changed significantly. So, workplaces now mix formal and informal language to sound more approachable and friendlier. This is down to growing globalization and digitalization, where this quick and friendly communication is a key. So companies tend to foster collaboration, team spirit, and this positive work environment. So there are lots of phrasal verbs and idioms, which I have included in this masterclass. Unfortunately for us non-native speakers, this might be a bit tricky, but let's see how that goes. Feel free to stop me if you don't follow. But as I said, I'll be dealing with the questions after the talk. So without any further ado, let's dive right in. We'll be looking at some common collocations. Collocations are the words that naturally go together. For example, we don't say make business, we say do business. In this case, we'll be talking about common collocations, verbs that collocate with the noun meeting. Then we'll be discussing some opening and introduction phrases, asking participants for their updates. Many of you will agree the topic that's quite tricky, and that's interrupting and handling interruptions. Also asking for clarification, agreeing and disagreeing, and finally closing. First and foremost, let's discuss some common collocations with meetings. I haven't included attend a meeting because I assume it's quite a basic one, but if you want me to write it down, I will. Just let me know. And I want you to know that there's nothing wrong with organizing a meeting. That's completely legit. That being said, I've chosen three verbs that are just nicer, more natural. The first one is a phrasal verb, set up. A phrasal verb is actually usually a two, but sometimes a three-part verb that consists of a verb and a particle, usually a preposition. So to set up a meeting is a nice, casual, but also neutral and widely used phrasal verb that means to organize a meeting. For example, we can say, can we set up a meeting to discuss the project milestones? Are we familiar with the word milestone? Yep. So it's like a
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
significant,
yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
yeah, Do you want
Yeah,
to?
the mindset. Yeah,
Mhm,
it's a kind of focal point where you
mhm.
make the touch point along the process of a project.
Exactly, like a significant stage. Well done, well done. So we can put these three verbs into this order. Like setup is the most informal, then schedule, and then arrange. But both schedule and arrange are also neutral and widespread, really. Now, I know what you are going to ask me, and that's whether we should pronounce schedule or schedule. And the answer is either. I mean, schedule is typically pronounced in British English, whereas Americans tend to say schedule. That said, um, that said means however. That's a great substitute for however, by the way. I know quite a few British people who also say schedule. I personally say schedule, but you can pick whichever one you want to go with. Just choose one and run with it. So, for example, we can say, I'll arrange a meeting with a client next week, or we need to schedule a meeting with the IT department. Now, if we need to reschedule a meeting or reschedule a meeting, but I'll just go with one, okay? We can say reschedule. There's nothing wrong with it. But in order to sound friendlier, we might want to change something and say push back or bring forward. Oh, okay. I thought somebody had a question or a comment. Okay. So if you push back a meeting, it means that you reschedule it for a later time. For example, we'll need to push back the meeting to accommodate everyone's schedule. Oh my God. If I say schedule one more time, I think you'll kill me. Do you know accommodate? This is a really powerful verb. If you accommodate everybody's schedule, it means that you make sure it suits everyone. So, you know the noun accommodation, and the original meaning of this verb is to provide somebody with a place to stay at or sleep in. But in this context, it means to make sure that it fits into everyone's schedule. The opposite of pushback is to bring forward. And this means to reschedule a meeting for an earlier time. So, supposing our meeting is scheduled for 11 a.m., but you'd prefer it to take place an hour earlier, you can ask, can we bring the meeting forward to 10 a.m.? Both of these verbs are informal, neutral, but really widely used. And while we can say push back a meeting or push a meeting back, bring forward a meeting and bring a meeting forward, if instead of the word meeting we use the pronoun it can only be in between. Push it back, bring it forward. These verbs are separable phrasal verbs, and this is why this is possible. The same goes for call off. While again, we all know the verb cancel, call off is nicer, isn't it? So you can call off a meeting or call a meeting off. For instance, we can say, due to unforeseen, oh, this is a mouthful. Due to unforeseen, oh, wow, third time lucky. Due to unforeseen, yay, Maria, well done. Due to unforeseen circumstances, we'll have to call off the meeting. A really nice one. You know that I've said that we would be dealing with 30 phrases. Yeah. So when I said that, I meant there are a few more. You see that I've grouped two or more phrases according to their meaning to save the space and the time. But there will be more. And I've also included a lot more essential vocabulary and grammar in my Business Essentials course. A lot of you have asked me about it, so I'll just take a minute to talk you through it briefly. So Business Essentials, yeah, includes focuses on four key business areas, which are business meetings, preposition. I'm such a grammar nerd. Presentations, not prepositions. So presentation, small talk, and emails. And apart from this crucial vocabulary and grammar, you will find a number of real life phrases, real life scenarios, and sample conversations, quizzes, and mind maps for you to memorize the new vocabulary more easily. And all these lessons are on the Thinkific platform, which some of you already know. This is where I create my self-paced courses. Speaking of which, two of them will be on a big Black Friday offer, so keep your eyes peeled. Anyway, Busy Essentials consists, well, there are two versions for you to choose from. So the basic plan is ideal for busy professionals and mums on the go. Yeah, I've got lots of mums on the go and they always appreciate this. So it's completely self-paced and you can study in your own time without having to worry about squeezing lessons into your already hectic schedule. And as for the premium plan, Busy Essentials Premium, it's starting on the 26th of this month, and we've got two more spots left. I believe I put that somewhere down. Yeah. So we'll be closing the registration on Tuesday, so you have enough time to prepare. And by this, I mean what we do in our, I didn't specify well enough, right? So you have access to the lessons on the Thinkific platform, but apart from the lessons, 6 live sessions are included. So this is ideal for people who need a more of a guided approach and who need to practice speaking more. So what we do is we focus on you applying and personalizing the knowledge you gain in the lessons in the live sessions. So I think that that's everything I wanted to tell you. So you can check out the link in my bio on my Instagram page, but I'll also include it in the email in case I have forgotten to mention anything else. Right, so let's get back on track, shall we? The next section is about opening and introduction. I'm not sure though, but I think I've said I'll talk you through, and this essentially means to explain or discuss something in detail. Now, they're very similar. This is why I've grouped them. But if we want to be really nitpicky, and nitpicky means overly detailed, then we can say that the difference is that with walkthrough, there is more of a step-by-step approach, whereas talk through is maybe more casual and more verbalized, so to speak. But they are awfully similar, basically. So, for example, we can say, I'll talk you through the main points of the agenda, or let me walk you through our strategy step by step. The next one is to go over, and I'm sure many of you are familiar with this one. It means to review or examine something. So, for instance, we can say, we'll go over the budget before making any final decisions. Oh, I love the next one. It's so flowy and so natural and spontaneous. So to kick off, it's an informal phrasal verb, and yet it's really applicable. So as we mentioned, business English is not as formal as it used to be, and many of us don't really have the chance to attend any really formal meetings. As a matter of fact, I know a few students have told me that they actually take part in formal meetings. But then when we went through these meetings, we just realized that they are not formal at all. So there is this mix of formal, informal, casual, and it's really, really fun and beautiful, if you ask me. So what kickoff essentially means is to start an event. So, for instance, we can say we'll kick off the meeting with a brief overview of last quarter's results. I love the next one as well. Believe it or not, to crack on. So, to crack on means to proceed quickly with a task. Um, and we can say we've got a tight schedule, so let's crack on with the agenda. You don't have to add anything else after crack on. So you can just say, okay, so everybody, let's crack on. But you can say, let's crack on with something. And the last but not least, here we've got to get down to. So, what is something we usually get down to? What's your first association? Let's get down to. Many of my students say business. You know the song. So, yeah, we usually get down to business or we get down to work. And what this essentially means is to start focusing on something important. So, for example, when you start your meeting, you might spend some 5 minutes having small talk, and then you can say, okay, everyone, let's get down to work. Let's get down to business. That being said, oh, can you hear me clapping? I clap quite a lot. So, that being said, be careful about the the pattern that goes after get down to. Most, well, I would say all phrasal verbs are followed by either a noun or the ing form. So if you want to use a verb after get down to, it has to be in its ing form. For instance, you might want to say, let's get down to reviewing the project timeline. You're probably familiar with the ing form after to. Um, Elena, this is something we've touched on today, isn't it? So like to plus ing. For example, look forward to doing something or get around to doing something. Are you familiar with the phrasal verb to get around to doing something? Like a bonus phrasal verb. So sorry. Okay, so get around to means to find the time. And it's used with the ing. So I'll just drop it in your chat. Find the time to do something. So, for instance, my lovely students like to say, "Oh, sorry, I didn't get around to doing my homework," and then I have to, let them off the hook because they use this great construction. All right, moving on to asking participants for their updates. Is everyone still with me? Is anyone asleep? I love the phrasal verb come along. Surprise, surprise. To come along means to make progress or develop. So it's awfully common to ask other participants, how's the marketing campaign coming along? Or how's the project coming along? It's a bit of a tongue twister. Yeah. If it's not on your radar already, it should be. It's a great one. Trust me. I know I say this about everyone. The next one is also awesome. So to fill in somebody on something. And this means to update or inform someone. Just give me a second to close the balcony door. The heating here is just insane. So I always have to keep something ajar, but then it's like too open, like now. Not your problem. Let's get back on track. So, if you have been away for a while, or if you simply set up a meeting to exchange updates or touch base, we'll get to it. You can ask, for example, Alex, could you fill us in on the latest developments? Now, mind you, pronouncing two prepositions in and on together might be a bit tricky. So, what we do is we pause for a second. Alex, could you fill us in on the latest developments? Now, I've paused a lot, but you get the picture. So there is this teeny tiny pause. This is a neutral phrasal verb leaning towards informal, but again, it's widely used. Enough with phrasal verbs, I think. Touch base is an idiom, and I love this idiom because it's so kind of self-explanatory. It originates from baseball. So if you touch base means that you exchange updates briefly. So, for example, we can say, I'd like to touch base on the new client's feedback. And I've actually just remembered the other day I met with a friend. She's from London, and as we were saying goodbye, she told me it was lovely to touch base. So it's not necessarily used in business, but is a very common business idiom. Okay, another phrasal verb, to run through, another really widespread phrasal verb. This means to review or summarize something quickly. In many languages, including my mother tongue, Serbian, we've got similar phrases. For example, we can say, can you run through the report findings before we move on? But we can use it at the beginning of our talk, really. We can say, so I'll just briefly run through the main agenda or the key findings of our research, for instance. And the last one on this slide is to bring someone up to speed. It's brilliant. I know. I know you love it already. Has anyone heard bring someone up to speed? Can just see you shaking your heads. And I can't see everyone, but okay. So, what this means is to update someone on recent developments. For instance, we can say, could you bring us up to speed on what you discussed last week? It's quite a neutral idiom, not a phrasal verb. Yes, it's an idiom. And you can use it pretty much whenever. So far, so good. Is everyone awake? Are you having fun? I am. Okay. You can't imagine what makes me happy. Cheers to that. Okay, so our favorite topic, interrupting politely and handling interruptions. There's nothing wrong with the verb interrupt. But if you want to sound less direct, you can go with either jump in and come in, either jump in or come in. This means to join or interrupt a conversation. So, for example, we can say, if I could just jump in here, I'd like to add something to that point. Or I'd just like to come in here for a second. And you've noticed that I've used just. We do this to sound less direct, like a little bit apologetic. This is really typical of the British culture. And we also often add a time frame, like for a second, for a minute, for a moment. So the person you're interrupting knows that it won't take long, but you interrupt anyway. And then how do we deal with these interruptions? Well, for example, we can use revisit, circle back, or come back. Revisit is a single verb, and as you can see, circle back and come back are phrasal verbs. And they all mean to return to a topic or idea at a later point. For instance, it's always a good idea when somebody interrupts you in a meeting to add or ask something and you would prefer to deal with it later. It's always a good idea to acknowledge the importance of that remark or question. So you can do that by saying, that's an important point, and I'd like to give it the attention it deserves. We'll revisit that topic in another meeting. Sounds good, doesn't it? Yeah. Or thanks for bringing that up. Let's make a note of it and circle back once we've covered the main agenda. I haven't included bring something up, but make sure it's on your radar because we use it a lot. So to bring something up, to bring up a topic or a point means to raise it or to mention it. As a matter of fact, let me write it down in the chat. Oh, I've already got something. Okay, Gordana had to leave. Okay. So bring something up, which means to raise or mention. An awesome one. Okay, next one is quite an informal phrase. Hold that thought. don't think it's rude. I think it's friendly and casual, but it's definitely reserved for more informal circumstances. For example, we can say, hold that thought and we'll circle back to it after the break. It essentially means to ask someone, it's essentially used to ask someone to pause their idea in order for you to revisit it later. Revisit is really fancy and nice, and isn't it? And last but not least, here we've got park it. Some of you might know to put something in the parking lot. Has anyone heard of it? I haven't included it here. Just didn't want to swamp you, but I will leave it in the chat. So to put something,
In standby.
kinda on standby, but if you say that we mentioned standby, it's like yeah, like up in the air.
On hold,
But this
no.
is like to postpone temporarily with the idea of discussing it at a later point. But yeah, very similar. It's just a standby has a kind of a negative connotation, but there's nothing wrong with parking it or putting something in the parking lot. So good point. Yeah. And this is something we can use when we are being passive aggressive. Like, good point. We'll put it in the parking lot for now, or we'll park it for now and revisit it later in the discussion. Or in some cases, never. So it depends. I'll just write down postpone temporarily. Temporarily. Do you find that word difficult to pronounce? I obviously do. Temporarily. Well, does anybody want to try? Have a go at it?
Temporarily. It's impossible.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
difficult. Good, good. Like temporarily, like this air. Brave, Elena. Many thanks. Awesome. All right. Now, if everything is clear here, our next section deals with asking for clarification. This definitely comes in handy when talking to those native speakers that have never studied any other language or speak too fast, or maybe they have a very thick accent. Well, whenever. I'm pretty sure that you know when you can ask for clarification. Here I've included like the whole phrases you can take and run with, which means there isn't much modification needed here. For example, we can say, I didn't quite catch that, or I didn't quite get that. This means that you haven't actually heard something clearly. For instance, you can say, sorry, I didn't quite catch that. Could you repeat it? Usually, just saying, sorry, I didn't quite catch that, does the trick. But you might also need to add the could you repeat it part. What we don't say is just repeat. I know that in some languages and in some cultures it's completely fine to just say repeat, but not in English. Um, Another thing that I wanted to point out here is that we don't need quite. So, as a matter of fact, I can put it in the brackets. But we often use quite because guess why? To sound less direct. You can also say, I didn't catch that, I didn't get that, but then I didn't quite catch that. Sounds, yeah, less direct. Then you can say, I'm not sure I follow. So this essentially means that you don't understand what the person is talking about. It usually does the trick, just saying, oh, sorry, I'm not sure I follow. But then you can also add something like, could you explain that in more detail? Um, Keep in mind, we say in detail, singular. We never say in details. Although a detail is a singular countable noun. I mean, you can say one detail, two details, there's nothing wrong with it. In this phrase, we just say in detail, in more detail. So this is a set phrase, and that's why we use the singular form. Now, these two phrases are neutral, but the verb elaborate is a little fancier and a little bit more elegant and a little bit more formal, but it's still widely used and I love it to bits. So you can say, could you elaborate on what you've just said? Could you elaborate on the changes you mentioned earlier? So this is a polite request for more information. We can also use do you mind? Not just with the verb rephrase. Do you mind rephrasing that? But you can use do you mind with, well, anytime you just want to sound more polite. Do you mind rephrasing that? Do you mind rephrasing the last part? To rephrase means to put it in a different way, to use a different wording. And but we don't have to use it in this combination. We can also just say, could you rephrase that? Could you rephrase that? And then we can say, if you don't mind. So yeah, keep the word mind on your radar as well. And finally, here we've got, what do you mean by? It's not too direct. I know some of you have asked me whether this phrase was too direct, but it's not. It's nice, neutral, maybe leaning towards informal, but it's definitely widely used. It's used for clarification of a specific point. So you can say, excuse me, what do you mean by resource constraints in this context? Um, do we know what constraints are? This is
Limits?
limits, limitations, restrictions. Well done. Yeah, I would well, say the first thing that springs to mind when I hear constraints is budget constraints. So yeah, I wonder why. Awesome. So far, so good. Oh my, you should have heard me coughing. This is why I have to hydrate myself. So, all right, now that I'm still live and kicking, let's move on to the section of agreeing and disagreeing. I have to say that I had my work cut out for me here. It was very difficult for me to single out. Oh, am I going to die? Yeah, if I do, just you know my contact. So, so yeah, it was very difficult to single out only a few phrases, but I had to choose a few. So I put a bunch of adverbs that collocate with the verb agree. Remember, collocate, meaning to go naturally with. So if you want to express strong agreement in a in quite a formal way, you can say, I fully agree, or I wholeheartedly agree. This is a mouthful. This is a tricky one to pronounce. Yeah, practice for homework. I strongly agree, and I completely agree is the least formal of the bunch. So, for example, well, you're usually good to go if you just say, I fully agree, or I wholeheartedly agree. So that's where you can just stop your sentence. But if you want to be more specific, you can. So you can say, I fully agree with your assessment of the project, or I wholeheartedly agree that this is the right strategy. Now, well, these phrases are quite formal. A more neutral and an informal one is I couldn't agree more. This is so widely used, I'm pretty sure you are all familiar with it. But do you all use it? That's the question. So in reality, we are familiar with a lot of vocabulary and grammar rules, aren't we? But then when it comes to applying these rules and this vocabulary, we kind of start bugging and that's why I would really like to encourage you to try out these phrases. Well, just think of a scenario, a realistic scenario in your meeting, and then try and experiment with them. You can also try and just send me a few sentences if you want me to check if you use them correctly. But I mean, you can't really go wrong with any of these because these on this slide are used for agreeing and disagreeing because they're pretty much whole sentences. Right. So we've talked about agreements, but a more diplomatic way to introduce your disagreement is I see your point, but. So this acknowledges and introduces a differing view. We can say something like, I see your point, but we also need to consider the cost implications. It's very elegant, isn't it? Just lovely. You can also say that you partially agree by using I agree up to a point. This is a neutral phrase, but it leans towards formal, and it's used to express partial agreement, as I've already said, and introduce a different point of view. For instance, I agree up to a point that we should invest more in marketing. Having said that, we also need to consider the current budget constraints, something we've just mentioned. Having said that is a great substitute for however. So if you feel like you're overusing however, like we all do, myself included, then here's your go-to phrase. We can say, having said that, that being said, that said, and it's much more natural, especially if we tend to overuse however. And finally, we've got that's not quite how I see it. This is a phrase or a sentence that introduces a very tactful and diplomatic disagreement. For instance, that's not quite how I see it. I think we need more data. And it's also quite formal. Beautiful, right? I love that enthusiasm coming from you. All right, last but not least, we've got some closing phrases. Today, I've talked to some of my students with the verb recap. Did I say about? I've talked to some of my students about the word recap. I'm already bugging. So, yay, Friday, Friday. Do we know what recap is short for? Any ideas?
What is the recap? That's the question.
Yes, a recap is a
Yes, I mean,
short for,
shortfall.
yeah, what is the long version of the verb?
Recapitulation.
Recapitulate. Well done. Yeah, recapitulation would be the noun. Yeah, well
Ah,
done. So, for obvious reasons, we tend to use recap a lot more. So, to recapitulate is such a tongue twister. So, and recap is also friendlier and more indirect. So, what it essentially means is to summarize key points. For instance, let's recap today's main discussion points before we wrap up. So, what does wrap up mean? It essentially means to finish or conclude something. It's such a popular phrase. If it's not on your radar already, it should be. For example, we'll wrap up the meeting after discussing the next steps. Keep in mind with the verb discuss, we don't use about, so we discuss something. Wrap up is quite a casual yet widely used phrasal verb, and it's in most situations, unless you take part in a super formal meeting, it's better than conclude or in conclusion. Now, at the end of each session, I like to ask my students about their key takeaways, and key takeaways are the main conclusions or most important points from a discussion. When I ask my students about their key takeaways, what I want from them is to tell me what they have learned, to choose a word, a phrase, a grammar rule, or a pronunciation rule that they have learned in the lesson and that they will use more in the future and to make it work for them. For example, the key takeaways from today's meeting are to prioritize the budget review and finalize the marketing plan. You've noticed that the words prioritize and finalize are underlined with a red line, and this is because I've used the British spelling. So ISE is British, whereas IZE is American. So again, both are okay, but it's just the difference between British and American spelling in this case. And last but not least, if you want to pass speaking time to another speaker, you can say the floor is yours or the stage is yours. I love both. For example, if there are no questions, Anna, the floor is yours. This is a wonderful phrase and we really like to use it. And with that, I'd like to wrap up my talk. And I'm ready for your key takeaways and I'm ready to take any questions you might have. So feel free to unmute yourselves and let's have a bit of a chat. If you're up for it, I'll stop sharing my screen. Oh, I can't see many faces, but it's great to have you here. Any thoughts or questions? Elena, you're the bravest.
Yeah, but I
Break
think
the ice.
it's a very, very interesting course, I think, because there are important sentences, phrases that you use that I heard in the common meeting, but I'm not used to use because
Using, yeah.
using.
Mhm.
But yeah, very interesting.
Do you
Thank you.
want to single out one particular phrase that you would like to use more often?
Yeah, I put on the paper get around to find the time, no, because I never use this, and it's interesting.
It's
Get around to.
awesome. You know, when you can use it, like, I never seem to get round to reading that book because it's so applicable. You know, that there is this book that you've
Yeah,
wanted to read for ages and then you just never seem to get around to it. So, yeah, a great one. Any other thoughts or questions? Neda?
I couldn't agree more with Elena. That's my key
Beautiful.
takeaway. But I couldn't agree more with Elena that there are so many phrases that we are familiar with,
hmm
but we just need to get used to use it more often.
Exactly. You need to get used to using more often. And in your case, Neda,
I
your
couldn't agree
favorite one?
more.
I couldn't agree more. Yes. Beautiful. Any other thoughts, Milan? You are smiling. That's a good sign.
Yeah, thanks for the opportunity to participate this course. So I'm really enjoying some of the phrases I already use.
hmm
So, for example, kick off. So it is
hmm
very interesting for me. And also to summarize, to recap. So this is also for me very interesting.
hmm
And maybe I would like to address one question
I love a
after
dress.
this.
Yeah.
After we finished everything with a meeting, and so what is the common phrase to be used, for example, to say goodbye and how to say uh, mm, talk to you, have a nice day, or what will be the next
All that
phrase?
sounds very good. So you can say, for example, the way I ended my talk was, and with that, I'd like to wrap up my talk. You can also say, now let's wrap up, shall we? Thank you all for joining me today. I wish you a wonderful day or week ahead and see you. Now, it depends on the situation. So if your meeting is already scheduled, then you can say, see you on Monday or see you next week. But then it's really common to wish everyone a good day and to thank them for their participation and attendance. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, of
Let's
course.
write
So
that down. Yeah. So we can say,
thanks
um,
for this advice.
of
And
course.
also,
Mhm.
what is interesting for me, this part when you have to take with you some question which you would like to discuss on separate meeting or how, for example.
hmm
So this part is really interesting for me. This presentation will help me, of course. So I have to spend more time and to spend more time with this
Well, that's
phrase.
music to my ears. So thank you for your input. I will write down what I've just said. So before we wrap up, I'd like to, so for example, thank you for joining me today. I wish you all lovely. I use lovely a lot. You don't have to. You can say, wish you all a great, an amazing day or a week ahead, and see you. And then you
Next
can
week.
specify,
Okay.
see you next week. You said, Milan, you raised a very good point. You said address a question, but actually it was me addressing your question and you raised the question. So this is another very common kind of a phrase, a collocation actually. So you raise the question. So this essentially means to ask a question. And to address a question, or in this case, the question, this means to answer it, start answering it. I hope this makes sense. Good point.
Thank
Alberto?
you once again.
Of course, of course. Any questions, or what are your key takeaways?
Thank you, Maria, for a wonderful and clear lesson.
Oh, my
Um,
pleasure.
and for me, it will be very useful the phrases to ask another explanation. For example, if I don't understand what someone says,
What
very, very
someone says,
useful.
so you can say, for example,
So I can say, I didn't get
that. Yeah.
I didn't get that.
Wonderful, wonderful indeed. Um, Girls, those of you who are incognito, any thoughts from you? You can also drop your thoughts in the chat if you wish. Maria, you were there and now you are incognito as well. Svetlana, Anna, Jelica, Eva, Draga. All right, right. You know, during the first masterclass I held in May last year, it was a lot more interactive. So I had prepared some sentences and then I asked the participants to complete or to say if they're right or wrong. And then the people, like some of my students that joined, told me, like, it's too interactive. I didn't want to speak that much. You ask people. But if there are no further questions or comments, I'd really like to thank you all for joining me today. As I've already said, I'll send you the video, but I'll probably post it on either my YouTube channel or my Instagram page or both. Um, I have to see what it looks like. Do you mind me posting that like publicly, even with you speaking? I think it's a lot more fun when there is your.
Yeah, no problem for me.
Okay, thank
No
you.
problem.
Wonderful.
I'm fine.
Wonderful. And if you have any other questions in the meantime, just feel free to reach out. You know that I'm omnipresent. I'm everywhere. So thank you once again for joining me. It was really lovely having you in this masterclass. I hope you've learned at least something new. And speak soon. Have a wonderful weekend ahead and see you next time.
Thank
Thank
you,
you.
Thank you,
Maria.
Maria.
Thank
Thank
you,
you.
people.
Thank you.
Have a nice
Bye.
weekend.
Bye bye.
Ciao.
Cheers, you too.
Bye.
Bye bye.
Ciao.